Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our introduction to GA4. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Andrea Falcone. I am the head of marketing and client success here at Cubicle Fugitive, and I will be today's moderator. I'm pleased to introduce today's presenter, Alexander Smith. Alexander is Cubicle Fugitive's digital marketing strategist and SEO specialist. As our Google Analytics expert, he's responsible for a number of things: implementing analytics tracking, reporting on data, and analyzing results to help provide more meaningful insights to our clients. So Alexander, over to you.
Thank you, Andrea, and welcome to everyone joining us today for this session or watching the replay later online. So today we're talking about Google Analytics, Google's free web analytics service that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's an especially valuable marketing tool because it can help us understand how our websites get used, allowing us to better tailor our marketing efforts, evaluate the performance of our campaigns online, such as email marketing, advertising campaigns, or SEO, and helps us to set and track specific goals for our websites, measuring progress and identifying opportunities and areas for improvement. So today we're going to be talking about GA4, or Google Analytics 4, which is Google's new version of Google Analytics. Over the next hour or so, we're going to be discussing some of the differences between this new platform and Universal Analytics, the version of analytics that is being replaced. We're going to run through a demonstration of GA4's dashboard, highlighting its key features. That's going to be the bulk of our presentation today, and I imagine the key reason why many of you are here. We're going to talk a little bit about custom implementations and what these can include for your analytics. And we're also going to discuss reporting, which is something else that I know is of interest to many of you. Now, I want to thank everyone who submitted feedback and questions in advance during the registration for today's webinar. We'll be answering your questions throughout the session. If you have any questions during the session, please write them in the chat. You should see the chat icon in your Zoom interface, likely near the bottom. Andrea is going to be moderating that, and will chime in with questions whenever it's appropriate to cut me off, as it were. So let's dive in. Let's talk a little bit about history here. We won't spend too long on this, but a little bit of quick history. So Google Analytics 4, this is the newest version of Google Analytics, and it's replacing Universal Analytics, or sometimes referred to as UA. Universal Analytics debuted back in 2012, back when the internet was a different place. Since then, mobile device use and app use have become more prominent, and a number of new privacy laws have been introduced in many jurisdictions around the world. Google saw a need to upgrade the technology of its analytics to respond to these changes in the market, especially the privacy one for regulatory reasons. And that's those are the key reasons why they've now introduced Google Analytics 4 as the new interface. Now, many of you are probably familiar with, there was a July 1st deadline we all heard about, and there was a lot of fear around that. And many people, myself included, made a big deal about it, expecting that at the end of June of this year, that all of our analytics tracking that we'd set up would turn off immediately, that there would be some sort of big switch that would turn off. And Google Analytics seemed to imply this themselves by saying that there was this deadline coming up on July 1st. The reality that many of you may have noticed in your analytics is that your previous version of analytics is likely still working as of now, which is mid-July 2023. And what Google Analytics told us is that turning off the old version of Universal Analytics, that doesn't happen overnight. That's something that's going to be rolling out over time. We don't know when each of your Universal Analytics properties will stop working, but we know it's coming up soon. So the urgency might not be quite as severe as we thought it was for GA4, but the importance of transitioning to this new platform remains. So let's jump into today's demo. Andrea, you can see my screen? It's all working?
Yep, you're good to go.
Perfect. All right. So let's navigate to Google Analytics for today's demo. Analytics.google.com. Let me just make sure I'm in the right, nope, just the right view. All right. And actually, I'm just going to start in a different view just to start us off, just to give you a little bit of a comparison. So what I'm looking at right now, and what you should be seeing on your screen, is the home screen for a Universal Analytics account for property, the version of Google Analytics that we're all familiar with. We'll get to GA4 in a moment. This is a demo account provided by Google, which provides data on its Google merch shop, where you can buy t-shirts and socks with Google's branding on them. But they've kindly provided this information for our analysis as part of any kind of demo or testing that you want to do. This actually shows what we all thought would happen with Google Analytics at the end of June, where I can still access this interface, but all data suddenly stopped tracking after Friday, June 30th of this year. Some of the things that we were familiar with Universal Analytics were these menu items, which have changed in GA4. I know many of you were quite fond of them. I certainly was. The main ones here were real-time reporting on just that, any kind of recent in the last 5 minutes activity on your website, which is good for testing purposes. Audience reports that really spoke to who is using my website, acquisition, how they're arriving on my website, behavior, how they are using my website, and then conversions, which shows information about any kind of conversion action, any kind of important action that I've defined in this interface that I want to track separately. Essentially, most, if not all of this information that's found in these reports can still be found in Google Analytics 4. It's just, it might be renamed or sorted differently in the interface. And that's going to be a big part of what we're going to sort through today. So I'm going to switch over to the GA4 property for this demo account. And I can change which Google Analytics account or property I'm looking at by selecting this big button in the top left corner. It'll be named whatever your property is. Now, this will look differently for each of you, for each of your accounts and properties. But in many cases, what you'll see is next to your Universal Analytics property, which might have a different naming convention or probably just have the name of your website, there should be hopefully a GA4 one next to it. In certain cases, it might be under a different account. If you do not see a GA4 property here or anywhere in this menu, or you see one and for some reason cannot access it, please contact me, Andrea, or anyone here at Cubicle Fugitive. We'd be happy to help figure out why you don't have access and provide that for you for your websites. So I'm just going to switch over here to the GA4 property for this Google merch shop. And voila, we're now looking at the GA4 dashboard for the Google merch shop. And in many ways, the interface is similar. We see a home screen with cards, and these cards provide sort of what I would describe as this sort of 40,000-foot top-level view of what's happening on your website. And we see information for a couple of different screens here. We can get into more specifics when we get into the reports. One of the exciting features here, though, is it provides insights and recommendations. We scroll down on the page. And this is where Google's machine learning is starting to come through in Google Analytics reporting. I'm hoping and somewhat expecting that this will actually improve and increase over the lifespan of GA4 over the next few years. So here, for instance, it found that on this demo website that there was a sudden spike of traffic on July 11th outside of the expected range. And as a marketer, if I'm looking at that, I might be able to correlate that with maybe I ran an event that day, or maybe a new blog post was published to my website. Maybe we were in the news and people were coming to visit us. And I'd be able to then very quickly just identify that trend here on my home screen, thanks to this insight that is providing me. Beyond that, another exciting feature that I like here is the search bar at the top. Universal Analytics had this as well, although I think this is a better version of that. Here we can, well, it provides me an example here, but we can enter in search terms here, like I'll type in users just as an example. And it will share with me reports that I might want to navigate directly to that relate right to my query. It's going to tell me right up front, this is how many users used my website in the last week. Boom, there's my information very quickly right there. And then it's also going to provide me with access to admin settings. Maybe I'm actually trying to change which users have access to my account. And so without even needing to know how to navigate the menu, I can very quickly find the information I need right here. Something else I can do here, if, for example, I type in country, is I get that insights icon, and I can see top country by users for the last week. If I click this, I got a quick insights pane will open up, and it will tell me over the last week which countries have provided most traffic to my website. So yeah, just some cool new little features just to provide, make this a little bit easier to navigate around. But yeah, that's our home screen in a nutshell. All right, let's get over to our menu, which, as I mentioned before, has radically changed in Google Analytics 4. We now have 4 main sections here. Beyond the home screen, which this is just it, we have reports. Reports is probably where most of you are going to spend most of your time. This is where you can find most of the data that we'd be looking at in Universal Analytics. This is where sort of your audience, your behavior, your acquisition reports, your conversion tracking, all of that can more or less be found in the reports section. And that's going to be the bulk of our demo today. We also have the Explore section. This is an exciting new feature in Google Analytics 4 that I'm excited to share with you today. In Explore, this is where we can manipulate reports, create custom reports, and really dive deep into our data in a more targeted way that might be specific to specific needs relating to a website. And then we have advertising here. The advertising section of GA4, it's a little bit of a misnomer. It really doesn't have anything specific to do with advertising. It's really more about analyzing user journeys. It's a more advanced new feature in GA4. And in the context of this being an introductory session today, we will not be covering it. Let's dive right into reports. So here we're taken to a report snapshot screen. This is very similar to the home screen, and again, provides that sort of 40,000-foot view, a top-level view, with what I would call cards, these sections here to provide glimpses of our data. Something that sort of pops up just very noticeable on these is many of them have this green check mark associated with them, and some of them have a warning symbol. We're going to get into that a little bit more in the report as it relates to demographics data. I expect for most of you, most if not all of the time, you'll see the green check mark, and it's not really a problem. Again, this warning symbol, we'll talk about that as we go on a little later in the report. So let's dive into these specific sections here. We once again have real-time report tracking. Now it's 30 minutes of tracking, and we get this very cool map view of where traffic is coming to our websites from. So daytime in North America, and we see most of the dots there. I find this cool to look at. I don't find it particularly useful to look at for discerning marketing insights. As a Google Analytics user, I tend to use this report to help test if I'm making any changes to the way that I'm tracking information on my website, sort of that technical stuff. But in terms of marketing insights, website insights, I don't really recommend this as a useful tool. It's a very small sample size. You'll find more value in the other reports. So let's start getting into these more useful reports. First, we have acquisition. So this should come as something very familiar from Universal Analytics. These are reports that relate to how users are coming to my website. And we see once again, there's a overview report, which provides us with these cards that we're now starting to get familiar with seeing in Google Analytics 4. But if we really want to get sort of those table views, what we're used to seeing from Universal Analytics, we want these more detailed reports. Now, something I'm excited about in GA4 is that Google now differentiates between user acquisition and traffic acquisition. User acquisition is really seeking to answer, how do users arrive at a website the first time? And traffic acquisition speaks to individual sessions. How do users arrive on a website every time? And so if I were to visit a website that has GA4 tracking on it, and I were to visit it 4 times over the course of a week, and I was logged in as a Google user, GA4 would recognize me as a single user, and they would track the first time I arrived on the website, how I did that. But I would be tracked as 4 separate sessions for traffic purposes. Both of these reports have their uses. It will really depend on what kind of data you're seeking to get from your reports or for your analyses to decide which one you'll want to use on a case-by-case basis. So here we have a reporting interface that's very similar to maybe what we were used to seeing in Universal Analytics. It's changed a little bit. But we see over here, they present us with our qualitative metrics, in this case, the default sort of channel groups that people use to reach a website, and then some of our more specific metrics and the measurement of how users are using our website.
Now, Alexander, I have a question. I noticed one metric that Google used to track, and that was bounce rates, and it's no longer there. Do you know why?
So bounce rates is no longer a key component of Google Analytics moving forward with GA4. It's sort of been grandfathered out of the system. And I imagine that's going to cause a little bit of concern from some of you. It's certainly a metric that was widely reported on. I certainly did that a lot myself. In my opinion, they've replaced it with something better. My problem with bounce rate was that it was a very negative metric. A high bounce rate was bad, a low bounce rate was good. The other problem too was that if I were to visit a web page, maybe say a blog post, and I arrived on that blog post page and I read it for 5 minutes, but didn't do anything else on the website, I would be recorded as a bounce because I only visited one page on the website, and that's all that Universal Analytics could track. With GA4, we now can track engagement, which is more exact. So if I hover over any of these metrics, it will tell us more information about what they mean. But if we're talking about engagement or an engaged session, it says here that an engaged session is one that lasts at least 10 seconds, where we measure the conversion event, or where somebody visited 2 or more pages on a website. The 2 or more pages was essentially all that the bounce rate could measure. So if I now in this example visit a blog post and read the whole thing, I'm an engaged user on that website, even if I only visited one page. So from here, we can differentiate between essentially the number of users who visited a website, the number of times they visited a website, but now the number of engaged times they visited a website. Or to think about it in Universal Analytics terms, maybe the times that they didn't bounce. And we see here further down, we see a new metric called engagement rate. So we can think of this as somewhat as the opposite of bounce rate, except again, it's measuring the data a little bit differently. It's measuring users who actually did stay on a website and did stay on that page. So your engagement rate is not going to align exactly with the opposite of whatever your bounce rate was. Bounce rate still exists in name as a metric on GA4, and if I type that in here, I can actually get some information on it. But essentially, this is no longer bounce rate as we knew it to be. What they're actually just showing us here is the opposite of your engagement rate. And so we'll just have to get used to the idea that the bar has moved between what Universal Analytics was tracking and what now GA4 is tracking.
Different change, but a better change.
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm hoping. Hoping that that we'll all learn as we get more comfortable with this platform. So a number of the old features from Universal Analytics appear here as well. Some have changed. I would argue some of them have improved. One of them is the comparison feature, which was always a little bit awkward to use in Universal Analytics. And I'm just going to click on this here. I want to compare two different types of data. So right now we're looking at all users to this website and how they arrived on it. But maybe I want to actually look at mobile users. I click Add Comparison. I'm now given this menu, and I can actually start adding conditions. So I want to say, I just want to look at users whose device was a mobile device. So I'm going to type here, and I'm going to type device, okay, device category. And then what within that do I want to look at? I just want to look at mobile devices. Okay. So I'm now going to apply. Close this, just get that out of the way. But we now see that blue is still showing data on all users, but I'm now just for the orange looking at just data for my mobile users. And I can compare them side by side here. Maybe instead of all users, I actually want to look at mobile users versus non-mobile users. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of all users. I don't need that right now. I'm going to add a new comparison. But for this one, I'm going to say I'm going to exclude. My device category is mobile. Now I can compare side by side how mobile users use my website, which is now in blue, and how non-mobile users, which is my orange, how they are using my website. And you can find these comparison controls on, I believe, every reporting page in GA4 that has these tables. So I'm going to go ahead and turn those off now. Similar to the comparison is the filter option. So maybe instead of coming up with a comparison, I just want to look at mobile users. I can set up a filter in much the same way and just look at that specific traffic. Another feature which returns for GA4, thankfully, is our date controls, which again appear in the top right. And here we have a lot more presets available to us in terms of what data I want to be looking at. And we see if I want to look at traffic for maybe last week, I can define what a week is. The general rule of thumb when looking at data is to not include today's date when analyzing data, and that's because today is incomplete. So if I'm looking at a website in the Eastern time zone, which I'm in right now, which is we're just past noon, any metrics for that day would be about half of what they'd be for any other day. So usually I recommend looking at data up until yesterday. We can again add comparisons. So maybe I want to look at how did my website perform over the last 20 days versus the preceding period. And I can confirm that here by seeing, okay, here's my last 28 days in blue. Here's my preceding period in yellow. I'm just going to apply that. And now in my reports, I can see, for instance, direct traffic to my website. Direct traffic is traffic that is not tracked as coming from another source. So an untrackable source, or if somebody simply types in a URL into their browser, that's where a lot of that comes from. We can see that traffic went up about, do quick math here, about 7,000 users. And that represents a 33% increase. We've got declines in other metrics, but we're able to get that very quick comparison for the metrics. And we see here at the top too, I missed mentioning this. We can see the reporting for all of the data all together at once in these headers. Go ahead and turn off the comparison. Then there's various other ways we can manipulate the page. If I want to look at more rows, I see that this one, there are only 8 rows, but if there was more, I can look at more data this way. If I scroll, no, you don't have the option here because there isn't more, but usually there's an option to click ahead to a page 2 or page 3 of results if we're limiting the number of rows that we can see. In the past with Universal Analytics, we would have many different acquisition reports depending on what you wanted to look at. For instance, there'd be one for default channel groupings, which is what we're looking at here, but there'd be other ones for source or medium. In GA4, we now simply manipulate that within reports. So if I click here, I can see different types of traffic acquisition dimensions that I can look at. I'm a big fan of source medium. I'm going to click on that. You see, my metrics have changed. And what this is telling me is more specifically how users are coming to my website. So direct, which is not a medium, is our #1 source of traffic for this website. And we see Google cost per click, that's probably Google Ads, Google Organic, which would be Google Search. We also see a couple of email campaigns here that this website ran, and referral from another website. See here, we can maybe look at page 2 of results. And this way you're able to find the very specific information that you need for your reporting and analysis. Beyond acquisition, we have engagement. And engagement mostly equates to the old behavior metrics in Universal Analytics. So if I go here, again, there's an overview, which will provide those cards with that top level view. What I really want is those specific reports. So I'm just going to jump right into pages and screens. Don't worry about the redundant page naming here. The screens refers to app use, and GA4 is very much designed as a tool that can be used to analyze websites and apps. I don't think that applies to anybody on today's session. So we'll just sort of focus on pages as the naming here. Now, what this is telling us is for our last 28-day period, which web pages were the most viewed on my website. And this is probably especially useful information for you in your analyses. And again, we can slice and dice this information in various different ways. Maybe I want to add a filter here and just look at organic traffic, especially if I'm interested in search engine optimization. I might also be interested in looking just at very specific traffic on my website or traffic to very specific sections. So this website, again, I acknowledge it's a demo. It probably doesn't apply to most of you, but they have an apparel section of their website. So I'm just going to go ahead and I just want to look at pages that include apparel in the page path, and your page path being your URL here, everything after your .com, .ca, whatever that is. So if I were just to type in, I just want pages that include apparel, I'm going to click enter. You now see that come up here. Maybe I don't want to look at this unrelated screen. So then maybe I get more specific. Say Google Plus redesign /apparel, and that gets rid of that. Now, if I'm looking at a professional services firm website, and I know most people on today's webinar are representing a professional services firm, you might be interested in data specific to maybe a blog or bios, expertise pages, insights. So what I would do is, I'm very self-serving here in my own blog post. I would look at the URL and I'd say, okay, I want to look at activity for blog posts. I'm going to take this URL. I don't need that first part. That doesn't show up in my reports. I don't need the name of this specific blog post, unless I'm just looking at data for that one blog post. What I really want to see is traffic for all my blog posts. I'm just going to highlight /post/blog, or whatever this happens to be unique to your website. And I would copy that and I would paste that here in GA4 to be able to look at that specific data on my website.
So Alexander, I have a question here. in relation to acquisition. How do you track unique views in GA4?
Unique views. So we're talking about, we're talking about unique traffic to the website, I think.
I believe so.
So I believe unique
Yes.
views is a metric here. It should be available in these reports. I don't think it's built into this report. Let's keep that question in mind, and we'll talk about it more when we get to explorations, because that's where we can slice and dice the data a little bit more and pull out that information, which I think would be more useful there.
Okay, perfect.
At the very least here, yeah, that does feel like a little bit of a miss in this screen. At the very least, though, we do have views per user. Yeah, that data is available. It's just not showing here because, I mean, quite simply, I could do the math myself and take my views divided by views per user, and that would give me unique views. But yeah, we'll build that in exploration later. Moving down to the other engagement screens, I'm a big fan of landing page data. And this is what pages are the first pages that people see when arriving on a website. I'm especially interested in this in the context of maybe search engine optimization or Google traffic. So in this case, maybe for these landing pages, I could add a dimension and say, I want to look at the channel. And yeah, I'm interested in the first user default channel group. I'm interested in how people came to my website the first time. I'm going to select organic search, and I'm going to apply that. Say, okay, from Google search, how are people arriving on my website? Or what pages are people arriving at on my website first? You're almost certainly not going to see not set as your first result here. I think that's just a result of this being a demo account. Usually if not set appears in a table, that's just because Google Analytics is unable to track what that information is. For a specific user, you're highly unlikely to see it in this table for an actual website. You're more likely to see that for more demographics-based data. But I see that my home page is usually one of my top performing pages, not necessarily number one. It's oftentimes a specific bio page or blog post. It is very high performing for a specific search term in Google, and it might be a higher performing page. In this case, it appears to be the homepage is being outperformed by a page about branded items for YouTube. Now let's get into some of the slightly more technical stuff. Look at events. Events are the heartbeat of GA4. This is how activity on your website is being measured. Events are any specific interaction or occurrence on your website that you are measuring. Don't worry about this screen too much for your reporting. It's not something that just in and of itself is particularly useful for reports. But events themselves, this is where we show data on every page view on your website. People starting a session, arriving. In the case of this very specific merchandising website, we see add to cart as an option or as an event that would be tracked. Out of the box, GA4 for your website, you'll have certain events that are track automatically. Page views and certain aspects of scrolling, user engagement, session start. Those are your big ones. That's what powers most of the reports that you'll be looking at. And that's essentially 95% of the value just for having installed the GA4 tag on your website and having this all set up for you. Some of these other forms of event tracking, though, again, something like an add to cart, that does not come out of the box in GA4. That's something that needs to be set up specifically. Now, the add to cart, and I believe if we scroll around here, there's also tracking for purchase. Purchase would be on an e-commerce website like this. That would be your main conversion metric. And because it's a conversion metric, it is being tracked also as a conversion. And conversions are events on a website that are the most important for your business. In the case of this e-commerce website, purchase is the most important metric, but then the other most important metrics are any events relating to purchase, such as starting to check out, adding items to a cart, viewing the cart, and so on.
Now, Alexander, does GA4 automatically track conversions?
Unfortunately, no. Out of the box, no. So without any additional setup, if you were to look at the conversions page in your own GA4 property, you are likely to see no information here. Not until they're set up, at least.
Okay. So for the clients on the call here, what are some key conversions that would be important for them to track on their site?
So one of the reasons why conversions does not come up automatically is because your conversion metrics are unique to your business, to your website. No two websites are the same, no two businesses are the same. If we're talking about a professional services firm website, which is a website for most users on today's webinar, form tracking comes to mind as maybe perhaps the most important tracking on your website. I would probably then also want to track other activities, other events related to that, such as arriving on a page that has a form or interacting with a form before submitting it. Beyond that, I'd probably be interested in any kind of event registrations if I were running any kind of events or webinars myself. If users were clicking on experts' contact information, if they were clicking on a click to call button or clicking on an email address. If there was a chat box, I'd be interested in tracking that as well. Usually that requires a little bit of coordination with your chatbot provider, but usually they're pretty good about that. Email subscription registrations, maybe interactions with a job or careers portal. Those would be the sort of things that I would want to be setting up tracking for on the website. This requires
Sorry, I have one more question. Sorry to cut you off there. Just circling back to events. If a website was previously set up with events with Google Analytics, does it automatically get carried over to GA4?
No, it does not. But depending on the way that that event tracking was set up with Universal Analytics, it can be easier to implement that setup on GA4. It really depends on the way that that was set up, but that would be something we'd want to look at on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
And again, this does require a bit of a sort of hands-on touch to set this up. If that's something that's of interest to you at all, which I imagine a decent chance it is, I encourage you to reach out to us and to discuss both your strategy for conversion tracking and then the implementation. We'd be happy to have that call with you. After the engagement reports, we have monetization reports, which we will not be covering during today's session. The monetization reports are very much aimed at e-commerce websites. So that's where either you are selling products online, like this website is, or if you are running ads on your website and generating revenue from those. I don't think that applies to many, if not anyone who's on the call today. If you have any specific questions about this as it relates to your specific website, again, please get in touch. We'd be happy to discuss that with you. And finally, we have a retention report, which currently is just the overview screen. They don't have anything more detailed than this, which I'm a little disappointed about because I'd love to be able to look at this data a little bit more specifically. Ostensibly, this is meant to report on how well your website retains users or the stickiness of it and whether users are coming back later. It's something that I'm hoping Google expands and that we'll be able to use for more detailed analyses moving forward. Next up in the reporting is our user section, user attributes and tech. And this section essentially replaces our audience tracking in Universal Analytics. And it really speaks to who is using the website. We'll just jump in straight to user attributes and quickly look at the overview screen. And we see here information about what country people are navigating from or what city, and then some information about gender, interests, and age. Now, the demographics, the very specific sort of demographics information about gender, interest, and age specifically, in your GA4 properties, you are likely not seeing this information populate. This is something that GA4 can track, but when you set it up for a website, it is turned off by default. And the reason is that this form of greater, more intrusive data collection places greater responsibility on you, the owner or operator of a website, to guarantee user privacy. So while Google assures us that individuals using websites, their identities will not be revealed from data that gets collected by GA4, this data is still subject to privacy laws. Pardon me. So for example, in Canada, we've got the PIDA, the Personal Information Protection and Electronics Documents Act, which governs this area. But then other jurisdictions, Europe has pretty stringent laws there. California has stringent laws. They have their own laws that govern how data is collected and used. At the very least, to collect this data, you would want to make sure that any company privacy policy were to be updated to say how data is being collected on your website or what data is being collected, and then how you would be using it. Now, as a data nerd, no surprise, I usually like having as much data as possible at my disposal and setting up as much tracking as I can. So my instinct is always to turn this on, get this information, and do whatever I can to get it. But I know oftentimes for websites, if there isn't a specific business case for acquiring this information, it's probably not worth the hassle or the effort of trying to make sure that your privacy settings are up to date to get this information. The other issue with collecting this information, and I said I'd get back to this before, is these warning symbols up here at the corner of boxes. Now, you're unlikely to see these warning boxes because you are not collecting gender, interests, and age data. What Google essentially does is, in certain cases, if a website's tracking is collecting this information, it will threshold the data. It will not show you everything in an effort to guard people's privacy. So in effect, by collecting data on more fields, you are actually hurting your ability to collect complete data in other areas. So unless you have a strong business case for collecting gender, interests, or age information, I would lean against doing that. If we get into our demographic details report here, we can again see our more detailed table views here with just country, but I can get into maybe region or city. We can add our filters and our comparisons like we can in the other tables. We look at tech. Again, there'd be an overview screen, and then we can get our tech details. This is where we'd actually get our information on maybe, as I was showing before with the categorization, what device categories people are using. So is it mostly mobile, desktop, or tablet traffic? Something we didn't look at before is the plus icon here. This is something that did exist in Universal Analytics and comes back for GA4. This allows me to add a second dimension for my analyses. So maybe I want to look at not just what type of device people used, but maybe also the screen resolution. I'm going to type that in my search bar. Here it pops up. Now I can see new users to my website. That's my sorting. Number one was desktops, 1920 by 1080. And I can slice my data this way. Or maybe what's more useful is saying what source or medium people use to get to my website for different devices. And I can see exactly how many people clicked on a Google ad from a mobile device or came from a Google search from a desktop. And this plus icon, the manipulation for that, here's all of the tables.
Alexander, before we move on, can you just quickly show us how to share or save reports?
Yes.
To send those to somebody else at the firm?
Very good question. So all of these tables have a share button at the top right here. If I click that, and I apologize, the demo is a bad example, We see here a share link, but then you should also see beneath it a download button or an export button. And this will allow you to export the contents of the reports. I believe it provides a couple of different options, PDF, Excel, similar to what we would have seen before in Universal Analytics. Again, you should see this in your reports. We're not seeing it here because this is a demo. If it isn't appearing for you, that might just be an access issue, and you just contact us, and happy to help make sure that you're able to share and export your reports. So that's it for our reports. I do want to get into explorations for a few minutes. Now, explorations, again, is a new exciting feature in GA4. This is where we can slice and dice our data and really get into more very specific analyses if we'd like. And we see at the top here, provides a number of different types of reports that we can do, which is instantly overwhelming, even to someone like me, because I'm not used to seeing this before from Universal Analytics. Some of these seem familiar, path exploration for one, but the free-form analysis, or essentially a blank, provides you with a table view that would be familiar with, or that you might be familiar with from the other reports here. So just as a quick example, I'm going to show you an exploration that I've already created. It's titled Landing Pages for Canadians. Call me patriotic. So here's an example report that I've set up to look at my landing page data just for Canadians. And so what I'm able to do here is to say, what data do I want to look at? What are my dimensions here? And then what metrics do I want to look at? So the question before was, and Andrea, you'll have to remind me, was it unique users, I think, or unique
views? How do you track unique views?
Unique views. So you could manipulate that as a metric here. And I forget if it's called unique views or what it is called. Views per user, views per session, items viewed. The naming conventions have changed, and I'm trying to figure out what this is here. You know what, I'm going to look into this a little bit further, just because this is a very good question and I don't have the nomenclature, the naming, just to provide an answer for it here. We will share that answer in our post-presentation email, because that's a very good question and I want the answer to that too. But here I've got all kinds of controls over my report. I don't want to look at 10 rows, I want to look at more. So I'm going to change that to 25. And then maybe within my report, I actually want to call out my big ticket items. And actually change this here and say, I want to set up a heat map. See what's popping out. And here I've got this sliced and diced so I can look at it by device category, mobile, desktop, etc. You know, if that's too confusing for what I want to look at right now, that's part of my columns. I'm just going to turn off that and just look at this here. So now I'm just looking at, if I look here in my rows, my landing pages, the metrics that I want to be analyzing for my landing pages, and then I've set up down here at the bottom a filter where I say that I only want to look at users if their country exactly matches Canada. I can set up all kinds of other filters, sorting as well. With these explorations, I certainly enjoy them to explore around. And if you're so interested, I encourage you to do the same. If you're looking to do analyses or reporting on specific data, especially if it's sort of on a repeated basis, month over month, I very much encourage you to create an exploration that you can refer to on an ongoing basis. Imagine you probably want to update the date as you go. This control here. If you have any trouble setting up an exploration or would like a helping hand setting that up, again, give us a call. Happy to help you with that. Just going to leave this by clicking the arrow out here. Now, there's all kinds of ways we can look at data here. One other one I'll just show you very quickly as it relates to this demo merch shop website is a conversion funnel. Now, again, as we were talking earlier with tracking conversion actions, the big conversion on this website is your purchase. And I've set that up here in this conversion funnel tracking. Before that, though, I want to know how people are, or how many people are arriving on the website, starting a session, how many are adding an item to the cart, beginning a checkout, and then completing a purchase. And by setting up a conversion funnel here, I can see how many people completed each step, and then what my abandonment rate was for each one. If we're talking about a professional services website, obviously these fields would be different. I might, for example, for looking at a contact form, I might be interested in session start, visiting a page that features a form, beginning to interact with a form, and then completing submission of the form. And then from here, I'd be able to again see my completion rate, my abandonment rate, and I might be able to, piecing that data together, find insights that will allow me to change my website or optimize my website to encourage more form completions or more conversions, whatever your conversion action happens to be. Now, the explorations themselves they're very good for slicing and dicing that data. I really like it for that. What I don't like it for is reporting. I find these reports to be a little bit, or more just, they're inelegant. I'll put it that way. They're not very pretty, and they're also a little bit challenging in terms of if I want to share this with stakeholders at my company to report on how my website is being used or how our marketing efforts are proceeding. So this is where I recommend moving away from Google Analytics and looking at better reporting solutions. So what I'm going to show you now is I've got this other tab open here. Another free Google tool. This is called Google Looker Studio. And again, it's another free Google tool. And this is a tool that's been around for a few years now, and it allows you to convert data from all kinds of different sources into customizable reports and dashboards. So here we've got something, and this is just something that we've created to report on data from the Universal Analytics example of the demo property. If I go in here, what I especially love about Looker Studio is that this connects to data in live time. I don't need to export data to Excel documents and then recreate charts or graphs that I might have created in the past or pretty looking reports. This is pulling live time data. I can also manipulate this data too. I can say, I want to look at a different date range. I want to look at this year to date. I'm going to apply that. And I see all my data changes in real time. So the Looker Studio, it doesn't come looking like this. This is just a report that we've created. But using Looker Studio, we can create very customizable reports for you that shares whatever data that you would like to convey to your reporting audience, your key stakeholders. And it's these pretty reports. I mean, obviously this one's branded in our colors, but allows for good interaction to be able to slice and dice information at a sort of top level in a reporting context to be able to answer questions from managers and owners. And it's something that I'm very excited about, and would be happy to discuss with any of you if you want to give me a call.
Okay, thanks, Alexander. I have 3 questions that were submitted when individuals had registered for the session. The first being, can Universal Analytics data be merged with GA4 data?
So this is a big one, just because there was an overlap period, and I guess still is if your website is still collecting Universal Analytics data, where we've got the Universal Analytics data still coming in, and we're now tracking GA4. I mean, the question here is, it would be great to be able to combine the data and to be able to look at year-over-year data going back years moving forward. And unfortunately, the short answer is no. The data collection methods between Universal Analytics and GA4 are incompatible with each other. Universal Analytics, again, some of those different metrics or the way that it was collecting data, like bounce rate, that's completely changed with GA4. You'll notice if you were to actually go into your property today and look at your GA4 data versus any Universal Analytics data that's coming in, that those data sets probably don't quite align. Like there wouldn't be a big difference, but maybe the number of users on your website would differ by a few percentage points. And again, it's just that the way that data is being collected is completely different. And unfortunately, the data sources are incompatible with each other.
Okay, thank you. Can Universal Analytics data be saved?
So yes, it can. And we talked about that a little bit in the context of the report for saving these GA4 reports. But here, if I were to go back into the Universal Analytics, and again, I navigate between my properties by clicking the menu in the top left corner here. If I were to go to any report in Universal Analytics, I see I've got share and export, well, and save options here in the top corner. And so I can export information here. Again, there's no data showing here because this is turned off, but if I were to go back a further date in this specific property, I can see my data here from my report, and I'd be able to export it this way. So the good news is you can export it. The bad news is you have to decide very specifically which data you want to be exporting, because as we know, with Google Analytics, you can slice and dice data in an infinite number of ways, which is both wonderful but also daunting. But this requires you to look at it critically and say, what data is important for me to save? I'm going to select that data and I'm going to just export that. Now, in terms of a timeline for this, again, obviously for this demo account, Universal Analytics data stopped tracking July 1st. And I imagine for all of us, for our respective websites, we're going to see something like this happen at some point in the future, where it will just drop to zero, but we'll still be able to access the data. Now, Google at last check has said that data in Universal Analytics properties will be accessible until July 1st of next year, 2024. Google has been known to change its timelines. I can't really imagine them shortening that. There's a possibility they might extend it, but for now, that data is available until July of next year. So if you have any urgency to get that data out, you have 11.5 months. So get on it.
Okay, I have one more question that just came through the chat, and just being conscious of time, we'll probably wrap up afterwards. So if you do have more questions, feel free to email either Alexander or I, and we can answer them privately. So this last question I have here says, does GA4 have an HTML code tag we can add to landing pages, like for mailings, for example, to track user activity engagement?
Yeah, much like Universal Analytics, GA4, it operates on a tag basis. So there's a tag that is set up on every page on your website that is tracking your interactions from there. In terms of tracking a specific email campaign, and what was the question specifically? I'm sorry.
To track user activity engagement through like a mailing campaign.
Yeah, so if in terms of tracking activity on a mailing campaign, if once that traffic comes to your website, arrives on your website, every page on your website should have the tag on it, and you'll be able to track that data there. In terms of tracking where that came from, or if it came from an email campaign specifically, that will appear in your acquisition data. Your default channel should be email, and your source would be some sort of name relating to the name of that campaign. In terms of how exactly that gets tracked, that depends on what provider you're using for your email campaign. I will say if you are just sending out emails just from your own Outlook, Gmail, or other email provider, and you're sending out an email with a link to it, and somebody clicks that link and comes to your website, in most cases that doesn't get tracked because Google Analytics isn't able to understand how that traffic comes to a website. Email campaigns usually do because they understand the value of that and they apply specific tagging on that. In terms of this specific question from this user, if you have any questions about a specific type of email campaign or a specific type of tracking, I encourage you to reach out if you have specific concerns, and we can make sure that your campaign is covered and that you are tracking the data you need.
Well, thank you so much, Alexander, and thanks to all of you for attending today's webinar. We will be following up with everyone who did register in the next few days with today's video and other resources that we've come across, so stay tuned for that. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care.